first interesting fact, there's over 55,000 businesses in Nelson Mandela Bay, small and big. Of those 55,000 businesses, 150 are considered large companies.
Wow.
So that's how our economy...
55,000.
Yes.
I haven't seen the chamber really being active in townships. I haven't seen... I was actually looking at your website and looking at the board representation, and it all looks like old people, no young face. And I thought to myself, Nelson Mandela Bay is such a young city.
Don't give up on South Africa. I think it's easy to fall into the trap of the negative narrative about South Africa and that it's in a state of collapse. To me, it's a country of lots of opportunity. We all just need to find each other and find a way to work together.
Sure.
And if we're solutions orientated, I do believe that we can get South Africa to unleash its true potential.
Maybe to get us started on the conversation, I thought it would be great for us to talk a bit about what you do. But I'd love to start by maybe you answering a question about who you are. So when you introduce yourself to people that don't know you, I'm sure that there might be people on our platform maybe that have never heard of you. How would you introduce yourself? What would you say?
Okay, thank you very much, firstly, for inviting me. And to introduce myself, I think nowadays I say my name is Denise and I'm a business activist. So that's where my focus is. But my background was in the automotive industry. I was there for over 20 years. I worked for multinationals. And I think that's where I really got excellent experience, and I learned things like crisis management, which has set me in good stead for the current role that I'm doing.
Lovely, lovely. Let's speak about the work of the business chamber. I only joined the chamber as a member, I think, just over a year ago, and I've been in PE now for about, in Kabeja actually, for about 12 years.
Yes.
I've always seen the chamber from the distance, and I've never really felt that I needed to join it until recently, because someone I knew came and they told me about the work that you do. If you were to sort of unpack the work that the chamber does and the genesis, because I actually did some reading up on the chamber, and I was surprised to read and to hear about how it goes way back till the 1800s. I thought that was interesting, even before it became the Nelson Mandela Bay Business Chamber. So if you were to talk to people, if you were to address people and speak to them about the work that the chamber does, what would you say?
Yeah, so it's an old organization going back 155 years. But I think in the last 2 years, we've had to completely turn everything on its head. It's a changed world, changed environment. So I came into this role over 2 years ago, and one of the first things I did was meet with our board, and we all aligned in terms of how everything had changed. COVID was like a match that was struck, and that kind of set the whole world and business in a different direction. And then you overlay it with the collapse of state-owned enterprises and everything else that's happened in South Africa. So what we've done is we've, very early in the curve, we've adopted this activist approach, but coupled with actions. And if I listen to our president, Loyiso Dutwana, when he talks to me, he says the chamber used to be perceived as an organization for big businesses, for white people only, and so on. And we've completely turned that around, where it's an inclusive organization, and we're there for small and big businesses. And what he said to me as well, he says we now have black volunteers, where before all the volunteers were white. And for me, the inclusiveness is absolutely vital. We all have common issues as business, and we should all be working together, collaborating to change things for the better. And that requires positive leadership from all of us.
Lovely. So maybe to take one step back, so how do you actually explain to someone that knows nothing about the chamber, how do you explain to that person what the chamber does? And the work that, because the chamber does quite a lot, because I spent a couple of hours reading up on some of your projects and what you stand for and some of your strategic objectives and all of that. And that information to someone who's running maybe a small business in Central might be a mouthful. So how can we sort of bring it down and explain it to the ordinary person So what actually does the chamber do? In more simple terms.
So our reason for existence is to retain and create new investment and jobs in Nelson Mandela Bay.
Lovely.
So it's as simple as that.
Lovely.
And then we've got strategic priorities that are orientated around that. And a lot of our focus has been around getting the city working again, because we need water, electricity, sanitation, all the basics need to work. But then we've also had focus areas of, for example, empowering small business. That's something we never used to have a focused approach on. So really, it's to retain investment and jobs in Nelson Mandela Bay. That's something we're very concerned about. When I used to work at General Motors exited from South Africa, and I worked on that project for 3 years before it happened. And it was very traumatic going through that, because then you realize the impact a big company like that leaving, and then the impact across the entire supply chain, right down to the communities that.
What was the reason for that?
Well, it was a global decision, and they reduced the number of their operations around the world. But I mean, I would sit in meetings in Singapore, and then you hear how these investors talk about South Africa. You know, and at that time, we didn't have a serious electricity crisis like we have now, for example. So what keeps me up at night and keeps me motivated every day is I don't want that to happen again to Nelson Mandela Bay. We need to keep the multinationals here, because they have a knock-on impact across the entire supply chain, right down to the spaza, where you go and buy bread and milk. So for me, having gone through that experience, I want to make sure it doesn't happen again.
A lot of people, including myself, don't actually have an in-depth understanding of the type of businesses and the size of the economy of Nelson Mandela Bay. You know, I spent a bit of time also doing a bit of reading because I was preparing to talk to you. I spent a bit of time doing a bit of reading on the economy of Nelson Mandela Bay, you know, and you dealing with big business, and you being in meetings and talking to all types of businesses and people. I'm sure that you've got a thorough, great understanding of the economy of Nelson Mandela Bay. How would you sort of map it out for the normal person, maybe who doesn't really have an in-depth understanding? How would you paint a picture? If you were, maybe let me ask you like, if you are addressing a group of first-year students about the businesses that exist in Nelson Mandela Bay and how the economy is structured, how would you paint that picture?
Okay, so first interesting fact, there's over 55,000 businesses in Nelson Mandela Bay, small and big. Of those 55,000 businesses, 150 are considered large companies.
Wow.
So that's how our economy...
55,000?
Yes, okay. And then the primary focus in our economy has been automotive. So the automotive sector is key. 41% of our employment is in the automotive sector. So you must remember, it's not just what we call the OEMs, which is the original equipment manufacturers like Volkswagen. It's also the suppliers that supply them. So we have lots of companies that do catalytic converters and so on, and components for automotive vehicles. So that's a key part of our economy. And then we also have a strong agriculture sector. So citrus, we export all over the world. We're one of the biggest exporters of citrus. And then wool and mohair, we also are very strong in that regard on the global stage. So I would say those are the three kind of primary areas. And then we also have other types of manufacturing. So, for example, we have pharmaceutical companies, beverage companies, which really makes us very much a manufacturing city. So when you start to look at our electricity profile and usage, 55% of our electricity is used by manufacturing, and then 15% by commercial businesses, and then 30% by residential. So that also gives you an idea of how the power is utilized. And then you find from that base of 150 large businesses in Nelson Mandela Bay, that enables the development of other types of businesses around it. And you must also remember employees who work at those companies, they get paychecks and then they spend money all over the city, which in turn creates employment. So it's important to have these big businesses as anchors in the city. to create additional employment. And then also what's important is that we need to make sure that we retain them, because these international investors, they can build anywhere. And once you've gone, I've had the privilege of doing a lot of travel in my previous roles. I was responsible for Africa, Middle East. So I had teams in Kenya, Egypt, and Dubai.
Wow.
And when you start traveling more and more on our own continent, which lots of people don't end up doing, then you also realize how South Africa is falling behind and how a lot of these countries are moving forward quickly and are progressive in their thinking. So there's a lot of opportunity for us. So we need to keep this manufacturing sector, and it also brings world-class skills with it. So when you look at our workforce that work at a Volkswagen, for example, they're among the best in the world.
Wow.
And with that technology that we have here, it also enables the development of other types of enterprises. So South Africa is actually a country with a lot of potential. We have lots of challenges, but we've got highly skilled people. And then we have all the minerals. If you look at automotive, for example, it's moving towards electric vehicles. And then a big part, the main component in electric vehicles. So if you drive what we call an ICE vehicle today, it's
an ICE vehicle,
which is an internal combustion engine.
Oh.
Okay, you have 2,000 components in that vehicle. But when we move to electric vehicles, you'll only have 20.
Wow.
And the key component is battery. And then for manufacturing batteries, 6 out of the 10 components that go, or the minerals that go into batteries, come out of South Africa. So that's the kind of stuff we need to be getting into as well.
I actually saw there's a Tesla thing. I don't know what it is.
I've driven in the Tesla.
Really?
So Rubicon has one out in the country, and it's an incredible experience when you go in the vehicle because it's silent. First of all, there's no noise. You have an app from your phone that you use to talk to your car. Remember, I don't know if you're probably too young, but in the old days you had a show called Knight Rider. And then Knight Rider would talk to Kit, which was his car, and he would tell Kit to do this and Kit do that. You can do that with the Tesla, for example. And when you drive the vehicle, it goes faster 0 to 100 than a Porsche,
Wow, man.
And also when you open the bonnet and the boot and then you look what's inside and then you realize there's no engine components, there's no catalytic converter, there's no exhaust, you also realize that that's going to create challenges in our manufacturing economy where those suppliers need to reinvent what they do. So we mustn't lose that capability, but we're going to have to reinvent ourselves, and we've got to move faster because the world is moving faster. It's like the change from the old Nokia phone to smartphone. That's where we're going with automobiles, for example.
Yeah. Something interesting that just struck me of what you said is South Africa's falling behind.
Yeah.
Can you just unpack that a bit more? What does that mean? Falling behind in terms of what? I mean, we always hear people talking about the fourth industrial revolution and all of these other things, the technological advancement in other countries and all. But when you say you're very well traveled.
Yeah.
So when you say South Africa's falling behind, what do you actually mean? And what does that mean for the ordinary entrepreneur that's maybe sitting somewhere that's even not part of the chamber? What does that mean for the ordinary person?
So an example with the automotive sector is there's a green auto paper, which is basically a policy framework for electric vehicles. The government has been dragging its heels on finalizing that. So the industry needs certainty on that to make investment decisions, and they invest 3 to 5 years ahead of the time. So if we miss that cycle of investment, then we could lose that type of manufacturing.
Do you know why the government is dragging its feet on that?
Well, I guess it's something new, and there's infrastructure investment required because you need electric charging stations and so on. But there's also incentives that need to be provided to make the industry sustainable. But that's just in the automotive space. And when you start looking, the comment about falling behind, for me, COVID was actually, I don't think people realize it was more than just a pandemic when that happened. I mean, it was terrible on the humanitarian side what happened. But when you also look at the vacuum that it created in South Africa, and then you suddenly saw rise to this vandalism. of infrastructure. I mean, I don't ever recall in my life where substation infrastructure was being stolen, cables, water pumps, you name it, everything seems to be fair game. So it gave rise to this vandalism of infrastructure, and then also the collapse of, if you think of Eskom, Transnet, all of that came to a head at the same time. So it's been a very difficult period for South Africa, and it's been very difficult for businesses to continue to justify their ongoing investment in South Africa, because we also have a confusing political environment and in terms of our relationship, for example, with Russia, which if you're a German-owned company or American-owned company, then your owners in other countries are saying, what are you doing operating there, So it's a very...
Operating where? In South Africa?
In South Africa, So I think that also creates uncertainty around our environment. And what I'm concerned about is, because of that vacuum that's been created, will we be in the new investment cycles, So that's why, as a business community, what we've decided to do, it's no point whining and moaning about all these issues.
Yes.
We need to focus on what's within our control.
Yeah.
So what we've done in the reinvention of the chamber, we've come up with all these clusters, for example.
Yes, I've seen that.
Yeah, so we've got 6 geographic clusters around the city, and then what we do is we bring those businesses together. And those businesses were previously neighbors and in the same area, but they never spoke to each other. They could be competitors, they could be in different sectors, but they're now working together to address issues of common interest.
Wow.
And it's around power supply, around potholes, around water supply, security of water supply, cleaning up their areas, because it's not nice when you have international visitors coming and then the city doesn't look clean. And
so you're basically doing the job of a municipality?
Well, what we're trying to do is we're trying to partner with whoever will partner with us to do the right thing. And instead of whining and saying, well, service delivery is not happening, how can we help you to deliver service? And it's not that we want to take over the running of the municipality, but we need to find a way to stabilize things and get things moving in the right direction. As business, we rather focus on jobs and investment, but it's difficult to attract that when the other basics in the environment is not working.
Yeah. Well, I'm interested to hear, what do politicians say when they see the great work that the chamber is doing and the activism? I think that's part of the themes that I've been getting. It's activism, businesses taking part in their communities and rolling up their sleeves and getting involved, which is a great thing. I'm sure you talk to politicians, and I know I'm putting you on the spot. You must be politically correct. But I'm really interested to know, because I'll tell you how I feel. I feel very disappointed as an entrepreneur by the government of the day. I feel very disappointed by politicians in the city. I'm very disappointed by, the blatant corruption, the mistrust, the abuse, and all of those things. And I'm very public about it. I'm interested to on your side, maybe as a person representing large business, I'm sure.
And small business.
And small business, yeah. Is that a recent thing, the small business part?
Well, we can talk more to that now, but maybe you want to respond to
so
this.
So some of the conversations, what do politicians say? Like, what are your thoughts around that?
Okay, so what we have done, and we are an apolitical organization, so we really don't care who's running the city and what political party they're from. But what we did, because political instability is a big negative. Okay?
And affects all of us.
Yeah, and it affects economic stability when you've got political instability. So one of the things we did do is we invited every single political party that's involved in council, that's represented there, to meet with us as business. And we had one-on-ones with them. And what we did is we took them through a presentation where we showed them, this is the state, this is how we see the state of the city. And we think we're at a tipping point now, and we need to work together so that there's stability in Nelson Mandela Bay. We can't carry on like this anymore. And it was interesting because all the engagements we had with the political parties, so you'd have like economic freedom fighters come, and then straight afterwards Freedom Front. So we met with all sorts of interesting people with very different ideologies, but everybody agreed that we need political stability and we need to do the right things. which is encouraging. But of course, when they walk out the doors and they go back to council, then they carry on with the nonsense, and you have more votes of no confidence and budgets that are not passed, or whatever it is that they're not doing, you know. So we have had that engagement with political parties, and then what we do is whenever there's a change in the guard, or you know, in terms of from a municipal perspective, we reach out and we'll work with whoever is in power. But we really do need stability, because since 2016, there have been 15 votes of no confidence in council, 7 different mayors, I think something like 12 different city managers.
That's crazy.
You know, so that instability, and I think the challenge we've had is there's probably been political interference in the administration of the municipality, and that really needs to be ring-fenced so that your service delivery portion can be protected. Because ultimately, the municipality should be supplying basic services to residents and businesses, which they pay for, you know.
How does big business hold these politicians accountable?
Well, I mean, we engage.
Besides voting and engaging and talking to them, what do you think, what else can be done to sort of show politicians that as business people, because essentially it is the big and the small businesses that are creating the jobs that government speaks about. They go out and say, we need to create jobs, but they don't do anything. And it becomes, and we all know the rhetoric, the government must create the enabling environment for big business to thrive and all of those things. But I'm just really interested, because you are in rooms that most of us are not. So what are some of the things that people are saying in terms of holding government accountable, whether it's ANC, EFF, whoever they are? What are some of the talks?
Well, generally, I think there's been a lack of accountability, you know, and that's why we also have a poor service delivery, you know. So in terms of accountability, it's very difficult if they're not, you know, when you in the workplace and you have an employee, you can hold your employee accountable. But it's more difficult when you're dealing with stakeholders that don't report to you. So our approach has been is to collaborate, and then we try and work on the solutions. What are the solutions that we can implement together? So, for example, on the electricity side, we've been successful in implementing a stage 5 plus 24-hour load shedding schedule for the large manufacturers to enable them to have a more predictable approach to load shedding.
What does that mean?
So it means instead of going down a couple of times a day or frequently, you can operate for a few days and then you go down for 24 hours in a row, which is more tenable in terms of managing your workforce. And it means less short time for people as well, because that's something that people often don't talk about. Okay. It's not just about job losses when these things happen. People also get put on short time. So that's just one example. But, I mean, we can collaborate in various different forms. So on the small business side, we've actually had a very strong partnership that we have in place with the Eastern Cape Development Corporation.
Yes, I've seen that.
And they've been supporting a lot of the programs we've rolled out to small businesses, because the other thing that's happening in the economy is your big manufacturers, they're not the job creators they used to be. You know, you've got the fourth industrial revolution, you've got artificial intelligence, you know, things are becoming much more, what is the right word, digital and robots and so on are coming to the forefront. So we need to make sure we create a strong entrepreneurship economy, and that's why we're getting behind all these small business initiatives. So we run 2 programs with the East Cape Development Corporation. The one is the Enterprise Development Program, and then we have an Exporters Development Program as well. And that's been going very well. And then we've been partnering also with business, and we created an entrepreneurship desk. We've got over 200...
Which has been doing really well, by the way.
Well, there's 223 registered businesses, and it's only been running since April last year. But what has been key is not just these programs that you're doing, it's also the pro bono support offered to these businesses. So if they can't afford legal support or HR support, we've actually got companies that have offered to do that for free for these businesses. You know, so I think it's that hands up kind of approach instead of hands out, which is key. And it's also to make it...
hands up instead of hands out.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because I think we need to be, you know, often... There's always talking about things, but there's never action. And to me, everything needs to translate into action. So with what we've got going now around our entrepreneurship desk, I think that's tangible, and you can see that in the growth. you know. So, but just going back to your question, you know, when you talk about the parastatals as well, or the state-owned enterprises, we, for example, meet frequently with Eskom, Transnet, and a lot of those discussions are focused on, this is the challenge that we face, so how can we together resolve that, or is there another solution we can look at? So we really focus on solutions,
Yeah.
you know.
There's something I wrote down here that I just want to read out for you, because it just ties into what you said about electricity.
Yeah.
And I just read an article that you guys published, that the Chamber's second quarter load shedding survey among local businesses revealed that the Nelson Mandela Bay economy has been losing approximately R1 billion a month. And I thought, I almost fell off my chair, because I thought, what? R1 billion a month? Since the start of this year, due to severe load shedding. How do you quantify? I mean, how did you even come to that number of R1 billion, R1 billion a month?
Firstly, it's quite a conservative number. It's probably more than that. We went out and we did a survey among our members, and we made sure most of the large companies participated in that survey. And that cost is due to the loss of production, so not achieving production targets, export orders, and so on. It's also, in that cost is the cost of purchasing generators, diesel. I mean, I speak to companies that are spending millions of rands a month on diesel. It's staggering.
What companies would be spending R1 million a month?
Well, in the retail sector, there's lots of money being spent because they have to keep their stores going. But also, I know of some manufacturers that do a couple of million rand a month. Just
solar? Is that not enough?
You see, it's easier to, so solar, the solar solution works well for smaller operations, but when you get into large scale factories, it's much more difficult to implement that, and also the scale of that investment would be huge. You know, so so it's not so simple. But what we are doing is we've grouped the largest manufacturers together, and we're working on a renewable energy solution. We've got a renewable energy cluster going, and this grouping represents 20% of the city's electricity usage. And we're going to have, and I think it's a first in the country where you've got companies banding together for a solution. And the solar portion will come on stream towards the end of next year, and then the wind a year later. And we want that also to be used as an offset for load shedding for the entire city. You know, so that's one of the solutions we're working on. But there's also a limit in terms of the grid capacity that's available. So you're working around all these constraints as well. So it's a very difficult and complex environment to be in right now.
This is just something that I'm just thinking about now, and I'd love to ask you this. Past couple of years, actually, there's in Nelson Mandela Bay, there's been this water challenge. And I'm trying to find the right word. I heard from people, I'm not sure how true this is, maybe you'd confirm or correct me, that there were talks of creating, what is it called when you convert or turn seawater into desalination plant? Have you heard anything about that?
Yeah, so there are studies that are on the go around desalination. And I think in principle it's a good idea to make use of seawater because there's lots of seawater, but it's also very expensive to do. And then it also requires high skills and a lot of electricity to power a desalination plant. So it's not that simple just to implement it. But in terms of our water crisis in Nelson Mandela Bay, it's very similar to the electricity and sanitation crisis that we also face, in that there's been a lack of investment into infrastructure as the population's been growing, and then there hasn't been maintenance of infrastructure. So on the water side, well over 35% of water is lost to leaks. You know, so I always, like when I sit in these meetings and they talk about the drought, and I'm thinking, what drought? Because if you just can rein in those
is it not
losses,
the drought?
Well, the dam levels, I mean, I know they're currently standing at 25%, but we get a lot of water we get 210 megalitres a day from Nooitgedacht via the Nooitgedacht scheme. So if we didn't have those losses, we'd actually have enough water, even if there was too little water in the dams. So key is addressing the infrastructure issues, but it's very difficult when you're running a municipality and you don't necessarily have all the resources. You need technicians and plumbers and electricians and all those types of skills. And you also need the budget to back it. And I think that's where the politicians come in, where if the money is not spent where it's supposed to go, then it affects, key things like infrastructure.
Have you met with the new mayor?
Yes, I have.
Oh.
Yeah, we had a meeting with him the week before last. We actually had a very good meeting. And the focus of the meeting was around the priorities of business.
Okay. I want to just take a totally different direction. And I haven't, and you can correct me here too, I don't know much about the chamber. Nelson Mandela Bay, for as long as I've known it, I've never really seen anything. Why do you think that is?
Yes, so I think we generally in the country, we have a lack of youth involvement in leadership across business, politics, all spheres of civil society. We need a vibrant civil society, and you need youth to be part of that. So to me, I think I agree with you, we need much more younger people involved. And something that we've been doing a couple of things now to try and attract more young people. So with First National Bank, for example, we've got an empowerment network. And that is, each event now is booked out long before the time. It brings young professionals together, and we try and inspire them and also get them to connect with each other. But we need young people to step up and have views and get involved. So that's been going very well. And then we're also now partnering with Absa Bank. They've got a Kasi Talks initiative in the middle of this month. I think it's the 15th of July, where they will be going into Motherwell Township, and there will be dialogue happening there, and they're engaging with the township economy. So that's something new that we've embarked upon. But that to me is very much where we need to go. But we need much more young people involved. So I agree with you. If you look at politics as well, a lot of young people are disillusioned and they're not voting, which is also not good when we need to change the country. So I think everybody needs to have a say. And with our massive young population, they need to get involved.
Do you see the chamber having a young board member in the next maybe 5-6 years?
Well, some of our board members would argue that they're young. But, and our key focus on the board is the people we bring on. You want them to be people that will add value, and they also need to be leaders in their professions. So it is always a challenge to find young people, and also often women. And then also sometimes people of color. But I think there's been a lot of change in that respect, where you're seeing more and more black leaders emerging, which is very encouraging. But we need much more inclusive economy, and everything we all do needs to be much more inclusive.
Love to get your views on just staying on this topic, the township economy. Spaza shops. I was actually speaking to a person that's writing a paper on just that whole value chain and how much money is just flowing there. And people say it's in the billions across the country. I'm not sure whether that's true or not. But what's your sense of when you look at the township and the type of businesses that are in the township, and maybe when you try and analyze that, what picture do you get? What picture do you get? I'm not sure if the question makes sense.
I think, maybe this will be very simplistic what I'm going to say now, but I think we've got a lot of resilience in our people, and I think there's a lot of innovation. When you look at where people identify opportunities and then they come up with a business to support that. And if you take Taxi Association, for example, I mean, that's a massive, massive business. I know that's not just township economy, that's bigger than that. But often, I think, as organized business, we have ideas and views on certain groupings and people that might not be correct, until you start to partner with them. And if you take the Taxi Association, for example, you often hear people complaining about taxis and so on. But they're actually very important partners. So if you look at the recent... when you look at the civil unrest that happened in KZN and the role the taxi associations played to ensure that we didn't have
that was really...
And also recently when we had that Stay Away Day and where EFF called for a day of action, the taxi associations were very active. And then if I think of when we have discussions around electricity, and for example, if we're talking to government, a valuable partner in the room is NUMSA and the unions, because they care as much as what we all do. So I think in this radically changed environment, I think your partnerships and the people that you work with, before you might have had prejudiced views in terms of who you thought they were, I think everything's been turned on its head. And then when it comes to all types of businesses, formal, informal, they're all important. And it's about finding a way to set people up to succeed. We've got very, very high unemployment. I mean, the official unemployment rate in Nelson Mandela Bay is 34%, but we all know it's much more than that. And a lot of the unemployed are youth. So it's vital that we all partner together to find ways for the youth to become entrepreneurs, to become employable. Because often I think people are also, they have this notion that if you want to get a job, the only way to get a job is to get a degree at university. And a lot of these degrees don't really mean anything, you know, and it may have actually been better if you had the skill to become a plumber or to work in construction, or, you know. So I think we've got to be much more open-minded in terms of the opportunities. And also, if you look at something now, I spoke to Brenda, she's part of our entrepreneurship
I know
desk.
Brenda,
She gets very involved, and they're busy training people up to be solar technicians, because all the solar power has been installed and someone needs to maintain that. You know, so that's an opportunity. So out of all these crisis issues, there's also opportunities that come. And I think we need to reorientate as South Africans. We tend to go to the negative, and then sometimes to get through the negative, we make jokes about it and all the humor that comes out. But we need to more and more think about the opportunity and how do we leverage that. And there's still lots of opportunity in South Africa, and it's not too late to turn it around.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. I know Glenda, I know she's doing very, very well, and I'm super proud of the work that she's doing. Let me speak a bit about leadership. I mean, you're a CEO, you are an experienced executive, and you've been a leader in so many different ways for quite a long time. What is your sense of authentic leadership? I think this word authenticity in leadership has been just thrown around a lot. I like it. I love it. You know, you talk to a lot of people, you know. So what is your understanding of how South Africans, how people can become more authentic leaders?
Yeah, so my view is quite simple. I think we need more positive leaders. And it doesn't mean being naive. It's about looking at things constructively and what are the solutions. And you know, and if you focus on the negativity, then you become completely overwhelmed, and then you can't move forward. So, for example, in our clusters, we've got leaders. So it's very important that everything we do, it's part of a collective. It's not about individuals and individual personalities. But what I do find is key is whoever steps into those leadership positions as the chair and the vice chair and so on of those clusters, it's so important that they're positive people, because they can't mobilize support and action if they are negative. So for me, positivity is number one, and it's not being naive. It's about focusing on what can be done and taking control over what you can control.
Positive leadership. So how do you identify a positive leader? What do you look for?
I think you know when you meet somebody if they're a positive leader. But it's people who are solutions orientated.
Okay.
You know, and I mean, I've got to think about it as well when we sit in meetings with government or state-owned enterprises, where you can't just bring anyone into the room. You know, you could have someone that could be top dog at his company of 1,000 people or whatever, but in that room he might not be the right person, because if you're just going to complain and attack, then you're not going to get anywhere. Important. You know, and we must also remember, I mean, I had someone from Eskom chatted to me the one day and said to me, you know, thank you for welcoming us with warmly, because most people are angry when they meet us as staff. And when you get to know a lot of the staff at Eskom, for example, they're good people and they're highly skilled. You know, and what has happened there is not because of everybody that works there. It's one or two individuals that didn't do the right thing. So for me, leadership's got to be positive. Integrity has to be there. It's about doing the right thing. And you've got to, the way I operate, I'm a cause-orientated person.
Okay.
So that's why for me it's saving jobs. You know, and I think whatever type of, you get different types of leaders, but you have to have a mission that you targeted, and you can't do it on your own. It has to come through the efforts of a team, you know, and if you're going to have an ego and it's just about you and your job title and things like that, then I don't think you're going to be very successful. And in this world that we're in now, it's a completely different type of leadership style that's required. And I think imagination as well, because you've also got to have the courage to come up with ideas. And sometimes those ideas will be shot down. People may laugh at you, but how do you change things if you don't think differently and explore other ways of doing things?
Wow. Positivity, creativity, or imagination. That imagination one is a different one. I've never heard someone. So I like that one. Last couple of questions. So how do you yourself as a leader, how do you keep yourself refreshed? You know, I mean, you just said to me, this point about positivity, I think, is so important. I think for me, it's quite it's a takeaway. It's something I'm going to chew on and think about. How do I keep myself positive? Because there's so much to be negative about. There's so much of bad things and stuff happening on the news all around us. So I think it takes a different, special kind of person in the face of all of it to always stay positive. Let's look at you. So what are some of the practical things that you do to stay positive? Question number one, what are you reading? You know, do you find time to read as a leader? If you do, what do you read? How often do you read? Third question, I'm just going to throw these. What do your mornings look like? What time do you wake up? What do you do in the morning? I'll tell you why I'm asking that. One of the richest people in the world, I'm sure you know this, he sort of likes to keeps his mornings open so that he can spend time with the family. And he sort of said in an interview that he feels that sort of fuels him a lot, and it gives him a lot of energy to sort of take on the day. And he doesn't take those high IQ meetings in the afternoons. He takes them in the morning. I thought, you know, that's like, it's a wow thing for someone like me. So I've ask you three questions.
There's a lot of questions there. No, look, I think we all wired differently, and we all have different strengths and different ways of operating, but I'm an early morning person.
Okay.
For me, it's vital that I get a fast start on the day and I clear everything out, so because the rest of the day ends up being meetings and engagements, and you know, and you also need to do. You can't just be in meetings all day. Yes. So I start my day early, so that's important to me. I think it's also important to have balance in your life, and balance means different things to different people. I like to exercise, so I play tennis.
Oh, lovely.
And I also recently went on a walk where I walked 300 kilometers in 12 days. And that was quite
Where was that?
I actually walked from Porto in Portugal to Santiago in Spain.
300 kilometers.
Yeah, and that was quite an experience because you had to mentally push yourself through that as well. And then
Was it to raise funding or?
No, it was just something someone asked me to do with them, and I thought, well, I've never done that. It sounds like fun.
What? That is crazy.
Yeah.
How do you just wake up and go walk 300 kilometers?
But I think it's important to try new things. And like, for example, when I play tennis as well, I'm not necessarily the strongest player on the court, but they say I'm courageous and unconventional. So it's a different type of tennis, and also you have to be strategic, you know. And when you can't, if you're not stronger than them, then there's other ways that you can maybe play, you know. So I guess that's how my mind is wired. I like to read. I'm never ever without a book, and I'll read a variety of books. It can be political books. It can be
same time.
Yeah, autobiographies, or can just be a thriller that I'll read. So
give us your 4 favorite books of all time. time?
no, that's too difficult.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay, ones that you've read in the past 2 years.
I can't even think off the top of my head, but I tend to read a lot of current affair books, but
Okay.
I haven't read the one on Andre de Ruyter yet.
Okay.
I've Justice Malacha.
You read the book?
Yes, and I've also seen him talk twice.
Wow.
I enjoy him. There's actually some very interesting people in South Africa, and when I see books by these people, I like to read them because you always learn from other people. I'm trying to think, what else I know I probably work too hard.
So what time do you knock off work?
Probably, it varies every day, so I try and get out of here by about 5:15 or so, and then do a walk, especially in summer.
Okay.
But then you also sometimes find in the evenings you have events that you have to go
Yeah,
to
yeah.
And so on. So, but I mean, it's just me, so so I guess it's easier to operate the way. I was married, but my husband passed away in
Sorry to hear that,
about 6 years ago. So I've also had to readjust my life as well. So it's a different period in my life, but it's also freed. I guess I'm in a position now where the kind of work I'm doing, for me, it's a cause, so I can put a lot of energy into that as well.
Yeah.
But I also like to spend time with family and friends. It's always
So
nice.
you travel a lot?
Yes, I like traveling and I like eating nice food, drinking South African wine.
What's your message to South African business people living in Nelson Mandela Bay? And again, you know this way more than me. There's so much of stuff that's happening, and people are struggling. It's very difficult for some people. Some people are doing well, some are not. By the way, I've really enjoyed being part of the chamber, and I've actually vowed to myself that I am never, ever, 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 ever going to, leave my membership. I'll always be a member of the chamber. So what's your message to people that might be listening and watching you and hearing you? What would you say to those people if you were not going to ever talk to them again? What would you say?
I would say don't give up on South Africa. I think it's easy to fall into the trap of the negative narrative about South Africa and that it's in a state of collapse. To me, it's a country of lots of opportunity. We all just need to find each other and find a way to work together.
Sure.
And if we're solutions orientated, I do believe that we can get South Africa to unleash its true potential.
Wow. Don't give up on South Africa. Wow. Thank you so much for your time, Denise.
Right. No,
it's
thank
been
you.
Lovely.
Thanks.